Sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, friends, neighbors, comrades, all citizens of the world, wherever you're going, wherever you've been, and wherever you're at, we welcome you to the Live from the Heartland show on CAN TV. New episodes air every Thursday at 9 p.m. Central Time in Sweet Home, Chicago on Channel 21 or streaming everywhere else at cantv.org. I'm your host, Michael James, encouraging you to take the chain from the brain, to get back in the people's game, because it's time to move from the lower level to the higher, from the shallower to the deeper, from the one-sided to the many, and from the abstract to the concrete. So without further ado, let's get it on. Hello, everybody. This is Michael James. I'm your host for this edition of the Live from the Heartland show. I'm up here in Chicago's very blue and wonderful 49th Ward. And, usually at the beginning of each of our shows, we do what we call opening banter, which gives me an opportunity to run my mouth a little bit. It was originated by one of our producers, Thom Clark, who used to do very detailed scripts. And he is still a producer of the show. And we are very fortunate enough to have him today to be one of our 4 guests. We're going to have Thom Clark on talking about the year in review. We're going to have Lynn Orman talking music year in review. Adam James talking the year in review in sport. And we're going to bring back a segment from an earlier show recorded by our late great friend Dan McNeil, who does a wonderful poem. So stick around till the end of the show to hear all of that. As a kid growing up, I remember just loving the cold weather. I had a pond behind my house. It would freeze over. We'd have hockey games. We'd skate around. And then when I came to Chicago, I was very impressed that I would see these flat surfaces covered with ice and people playing hockey in parks, that kind of thing. Thom Clark, our first guest, he has a little something to say about that. So good morning to you, or good afternoon, wherever it may be. Hello, Thom. How are you doing?
Happy holidays, Michael, and all your listening and watching audience. It's great to be back on again. Ice skating was a big thrill of ours. My dad used to freeze a rink in our backyard, which was an old tennis court in the far back part of our large lot in the western suburbs. But Keystone Park nearby and other parks were all flooded. And in high school, I actually played hockey every Thursday morning. I was in the seminary high school, so we had Thursdays off. And we would rent Richland Commons in Oak Park for the whole morning for next to nothing because there was no one else around to skate. We had intramural hockey games going for 3 or 4 hours. It was a big part of growing up. Flash forward to today, there's been one winter since my 11-year-old grandson's been walking this earth when we might have been able to freeze our backyard for 4 days or 5 days without it thawing on us. I mean, my dad's backyard rink would be there from probably around Thanksgiving to the middle or end of February. And I think that's my biggest sign of global warming and climate change is that it's really hard to do that anymore unless you have pipes underneath the surface like we have over at Warren Park.
Well, another indicator of all of that, Thom, is to my understanding, the bait shop down at Montrose by the lake, which is usually closed up at this time of year, was open on Christmas Day.
It's the first time in years that Dale Bowman, who writes an outdoor column in the Sun-Times, really a fascinating column twice a week if you want to catch up on not just fishing and hunting, but a lot of other conservation stuff. And he's the one who pointed out that the bait shop is open as it's never been because A, it's so warm, B, the park district hasn't turned off the water. So the bait shop was open for business on Christmas, and probably given the weather this week, the rest of this week they'll be open because anglers always love to go out on the pier, at least at Montrose, if not elsewhere, and see what they can catch. And of course, the lake's not frozen over yet.
No, it isn't. Well, that's kind of our introduction to the year in review, and I believe we're going to start off with more on climate change. So you take it away.
Well, one of the big stories of the year, I believe, is that it will be the warmest the Earth has ever been since recorded time. And probably we'll be telling our grandkids and others that this was the last cool spring and fall. And to talk about 60-degree days in summer will probably also be an oddity, much less no snow on Christmas. Although this year, Easter comes early and we could have snow on Easter because that's the way the crazy weather patterns are going. And I think it's something that, a lot of us have talked about for years is we throw more carbon up into the atmosphere, but it's happened. And the recent international conference in Dubai, of all places, an oil capital, the COPS conference, barely came to a consensus about beginning to back off on fossil fuels. The host country actually threatened to veto the final statement if banning fossil fuels by 2030 ever came up in the final document. And I can't remember what the exact wording was, but they got around it, made some commitments that are voluntary. And that's been the problem with past agreements, is that it's all voluntary. And the biggest polluters, the US, China, now India, used to be Europe, but they have converted so much to solar and wind that they're no longer the big offenders. It's going to be really tough to get these big economies to actually slow down their use of fossil fuels and beef up wind and solar, as well as electrical batteries, to make that transition away from fossil fuels.
Thom, what about Third Act Illinois? They're doing something with big banks. Is that related to climate change?
Certainly is. Third Act is a national organization that's trying to organize seniors to leave some semblance of a decent earth behind for their grandkids. It's come up now for the third time. We're thinking of legacy now. And Third Act Illinois went from like 0 to 300 members this past year, organized by Peg Dublin, who's been a guest on Live from the Heartland in the past. And a lot of interesting North Side and Evanston and Skokie activists concerned about climate change. And one of their first big issues has been trying to stop investment in fossil fuel companies that the big banks are doing. And the approach is, as consumers, we've already had a couple of actions downtown at Chase. There's going to be a big announcement for a campaign that's already been underway to try to get Costco to drop Citibank sponsorship of their credit cards, because that's one of the biggest offenders is Citibank. The Wells Fargo and Bank of America are the other two bad guys as far as preserving some of the climate for our kids, because it is fossil fuels that spin off the most carbon. We probably can control the way agriculture produces methane that also contributes to the problem. But the one thing we could really start fixing more aggressively is our use of fossil fuels. And the sooner the better for trying to prevent us from going over the limit. Third Act Illinois, you can find on Facebook. My wife happens to be the editor of the newsletter, which is a very informative monthly group, and it's free to join. It's a very active, interesting group. It even has a book club. So Third Act Illinois is one group I want to plug tonight.
Well, we like that. I'm going to check them out more closely because it sounds like there'd be a lot of friendly senior citizens over there. And let's shift to war. Now, any year that we were doing a review, we could probably find some horrendous events taking place around the world. This year is really special in that negative, in a negative way. Tell us what's going on, Thom.
One only has to look at the stock price of Raytheon and the other defense material producers. They're having a field day with the stalemate in Ukraine, the outbreak of war in Gaza, the Sudan, which is below the headlines, continues unabated. And there are civil wars still going all around, supplied mostly by the big powers or third-party actors who get the armaments and bombs from the big powers. So I think this is one of the roughest years without a wholesale world war going on, that the arms industry is really having a heyday because of all these outbreaks of war. In the 6 or 7 decades I've been on this planet, I've never seen a single war solve the problem that it was originally fought over. Just is not a solution. It is something that is caught up in retribution and revenge. But military victories are very hard to gain. And the ultimate goal of most of the wars that happen are not ever resolved by how many bullets or bombs or drones you might have to deploy. It is negotiation negotiations, compromise, a really tough word for people to fathom, and in this era, even back here at home. So I think that the next to the climate, the next big story facing the world are these outbreaks of war and how we can stop them.
There was a certain word that you said that led me to want to ask about the Pope at this time in history. We are our home base is Loyola, and it is a Catholic university. Sometimes I think we're a little irreverent, and I'm amazed that they let us keep being on the show. But all along the way, I've had as two of my producers and sometimes guests, both you and Katie Hogan, who know the Catholic Church real well. Tell us a little bit about the Pope and his actions in the last year.
Well, he's been very busy for 83 years old and has some health challenges. But to be honest, I pray for him every week when I go to church up in Evanston, because the longer he sticks around, I think the better the world will be for it. His comments, his wonderful writings and books are really followed by people, and he's had influence, particularly with young people. I don't know how many of them are going to start coming back to church, because there are many other challenges the institution of the Catholic Church and other.
I want them to vote.
Well, that's the biggest thing we need to get them to do.
Yeah.
But because of a world synod that this Pope has called, which many bishops have been opposed to because he's included other people for the first time, including women, about 25% of the participants in this recent synod, which is a year-long process that's still going on, were women who were able to vote on the final documents that are coming out. It's actually pretty revolutionary, although for some of us, he didn't go far enough. More recently, he has promulgated that it is legal and ethical for the church to bless gay couples. This was a fine line distinction that didn't quite cross into canon law. Without getting into the nitty gritty too much about that, he has not blessed gay couples or gay marriages per se. And he made it very clear these blessings should take place outside of any formal liturgical ceremony. But it's still a step forward in a very conservative, when it comes to matters of reproductive health, institution that the Catholic Church would be, its main leader would be taking that kind of a step that, of course, so many other congregations and synagogues and whatnot have done for years. I don't think that Jesus, if he was still walking on this planet, would be concerned about who you're in love with. It's the fact that you are in love that we ought to bless. And I think that's what the pontiff has said. But to finish the Pope's great year, his Christmas Eve message took on the producers of weapons of war. And it's a phenomenal statement. If you want to read his Christmas message, it's all over the internet. It's a very inspiring opportunity for people to take some confidence that maybe we can start turning some of our warlike activity around. He really called out the makers of weapons.
I just remembered what the word was when you said he didn't go far enough, and then you used the word compromise. That was the word I was going to use leading into your talk about the Pope. But I like how he really came down on some right-wing popes and removed them from their position and kicked another guy out of his apartment in the Vatican. Anyhow, that was a good thing that happened this year, what's going on with the Pope. Another good thing has been the successes for unions and the amount of organizing that's going on. Share a little bit on that, Thom.
Well, I remember one of my mentors, the late Monsignor Jack Egan, who complained when he came back to Chicago from Notre Dame a couple of decades ago that there wasn't enough organizing going on. I was present when he pointed his finger at a local union leader and said, "When are you guys going to get some organizers back out in the streets? No wonder the unions have lost their influence." Well, the UAW showed, and I think the Actors Guild as well and the Writers Union have shown that when you organize, you can get some stuff done. Even back here in Chicago, Columbia College is part-time faculty went on strike, the longest adjunct faculty strike that we know of in the country. And they finally got an agreement going into this holiday, hoping that will be voted on and that real tough thing for students who had classes canceled and substitute teachers and all that. But the UAW, United Auto Workers, really showed some muster in going on strike against the big three all at once and doing selective walkouts that really put economic pressure on these owners who have been, along with their stockholders, making out like Flint. Remember, we bailed these companies out during the recession, and then now we find we can hardly afford new car prices. So I think the fact that the union said, we ought to be getting some of that money back that we gave up during the recession, and they ultimately won. It's a really phenomenal victory, and it's clearly leadership of the UAW is now going to take on Tesla and other non-union companies.
Yeah, and over in I think Denmark or in a number of countries, the workers have really been hostile to Tesla, organized labor in Europe, which is a good story. Let's bring it closer to home now. There's a lot to talk about in Chicago. I mean, when you talk about labor union victories around the country, we've had a few here. We also have a new mayor who came in facing a lot of difficult situations. And we have a very powerful former Irish alderman who just got convicted. There's a lot about Chicago. Why don't you tell us what some of the things that you think are really important to remember about things going on in our beloved city over the past year?
Well, I guess I'd want to start with Alderman Burke, who's still Irish, by the way. But I think that the conviction, which surprised some people because they thought the feds had a weak case, but the feds have been convicting over the last couple of decades a lot of local politicians over fraud, racketeering, and bribery charges, and they have about a 94% success rate. So when they go after somebody, they really get the goods and put forward a good case that convinces the jury. The jury had 300 pages of instructions from the judge to wade through to come to their verdict. And it was, I think, a 17-count indictment, and Alderman Ed Burke got convicted on all counts. One of his co-defendants got off, and another one got convicted on a couple of charges. But I have to think that Michael Madigan, whose trial is coming up perhaps later this year, has to be shaking in his skinny boots because they have a very similar kind of case against Madigan, but probably more in-person witnesses that will be testifying against him. I think this is a sign that the Irish mafia of our political machine is really beginning to fade away as these convictions catch up on them. And to my mind, it took a long time to get him prosecuted, 5 years. That's what a good staff of lawyers will do for you. The pandemic played a little bit of a role in that because they knew they needed the big ceremonial courtroom in the Dirksen building to stage this thing because there was so much interest in it. And but I think he got his just desserts. The Ed Burke that I remember, despite everything else he did, was basically fleecing working families with the way he got property tax breaks to downtown corporations, including the former president's tower, a name that we shall not mention. I mean, he became a wealthy man fleecing regular taxpayers by getting big time taxpayers tax breaks on their property taxes. And he got it through what he got convicted for, a quid pro quo kind of wink, wink trade-off. I also remember him, the two Eddies, Fast Eddie and Ed Burke, being the ones that held up a lot of Harold Washington's initiatives with the council wars that took place. And, that was probably one of the most overt racist times in our city's history. And yet that's what the machine was a huge racist, institutional racism machine. And I hope with the new progressively oriented city council, which Mayor Johnson does have a majority of support on most issues, will be a sign of changing that, and that we don't see too many of these current city council members caught up by the feds in future years.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the mayor and the big challenge at hand, which, he came in. It was a wonderful victory. A lot of us, I know all of us involved with the show, did some work for him. He's taken a few hits, and he has really been hit hard uh, by an issue that is hitting the country hard, and that would be the number of people south of the border and everywhere else in the world coming to the south of the border and wanting to come to the U.S. To become, migrants is not really a great word, but newcomers, future citizens.
I see them as newcomers, which is how most of us came here. We are all visitors from somewhere else in this world, going back 250 years. We threw out the local residents. We wonder why we have all this concern about immigration now, because we all came from somewhere else. And I think we sometimes forget that. So I see
Some of us do.
I see them as newcomers who are victimized often by U.S. foreign policy in Central and South America going back several decades. And the economic ruin, as well as the outright fascism in some of those countries south of the border, have caused them to look for a better way of life. And they see the U.S., for all its faults, still the best bet to have that new life. And we have generally been a welcoming city. We accepted some 30,000 Ukrainians after that war broke out 2 years ago, and they were able to kind of assimilate into our existing culture and economic life, in part because there were already a lot of Ukrainians here. And so some of those support groups were already in place. Whereas Venezuelans, and we're talking about a lot of formerly highly educated middle class Venezuelans, have been making trek for thousands of miles with their families because they've been outright harassed, if not threatened with death, by the goon squads and whatnot that are operating out in that country, much like has happened in other parts of Central America. So there's an underlying reason why these folks are showing up at the border, and we really need a national and international solution to it. The governor of Texas thinks he's doing a cute one by sending people up here by bus and now plane to give blue state mayors like Brandon Johnson and the mayor of New York and the mayor of Denver, to mention a few, conniption fits over having to deal with what they see as a continuing issue on the border. And there's no doubt a lot of pressure on those border towns. I've talked a lot with people who have done work down there, and it's really an almost untenable situation. But we could be doing more, particularly if we had true immigration reform, which has been tried since back with the Bushes in office. And even they couldn't get the Republican Party to go along with some legitimate, reasonable immigration reforms. It's certainly not going to happen with the current Congress. So we're stuck with this overwhelming problem that the former mayor really didn't prepare the city very well for, and now Brandon Johnson has to cope with it. I think there's been some bad decisions by some of his young, lean staff. He's still staffing up, which has been one of the major criticisms, is that he hasn't brought enough of the right people on board quick enough. One must keep in mind that he had about 2 weeks to prepare to take over the city's administration after winning his election, unlike Lori Lightfoot and other mayors before, who had generally, from primary time on, several months to prepare to take over the reins to City Hall. Brandon, I was giving a lot of room to catch his breath and figure out what to do next. But that time clock is beginning to wear thin, particularly with the business community, because all they've seen are some pretty pro-labor victories in city council for low-wage workers, for tip workers, giving time off that wasn't necessarily in human resources personnel policies. So Chicago's a far more worker-friendly city in just the few months Brandon Johnson's been in office.
Thom Clark, we only have a couple of minutes left, and so I'm going to, usually the sports come at the end, and we do have a sports section today at the end, but let me ask you about stadiums. The Bears are still messing around with where they're going to play in the future, and we also know that our soccer team has got a lease on on some property on public housing space, a 99-year lease. Talk about those two stadiums for watching soccer and football, both.
Well, I'm not sure we have time to get into the soccer story. The Bears story is one where Brandon probably can't afford to lose the Bears, but I'm not sure it's going to end up being his decision. And there will be a lot of opposition to more buildings on the lakefront, which is clearly where McCaskey wants to go. He has several more years lease on the stadium he plays in now, which I always thought that was a mistake by Daley to do that kind of rehab at Soldier Field. There are plenty of other places downtown with good transportation where a stadium could be built, that it doesn't appear that that's where the Bears want to go. I don't know.
I always think they should go over by the old steel mills down there, But anyhow.
That has always been a problem place to go. And in the remaining time, there was a big brouhaha over how Dyke Stadium, I'm sorry, that's what the place is up
That's what it's called, Evanston, Northwestern football.
And while Northwestern's football has done a little better this year than people expected, the real opposition to a new stadium, which will be smaller, are the concerts they're now going to have. Although they lost some, the original number was 10 or 12. Now they promised to only have 6. I see that fading away over the next 10 years. They did get a big promise for a huge increase in the annual payments Northwestern makes to the city of Evanston, which they've always been cheapskates compared to other Ivy colleges who typically make payments in kind for the property taxes they don't pay, but they still get police and fire protection and ambulances and all that. So I think that the city of Evanston, Dan Biss is the one who made the deciding vote, decided that money was worth the trade-offs for having 6 concerts a year.
Thom Clark, you filled us in on a lot of things, and I'm really grateful for that. And I want to thank you. And I'm officially inviting you back to be on the show as well as helping to produce it. So with that said, I'm going to say goodbye. We're going to take a short musical break, and we're going to bring on another regular, this time it'll be our music producer, the one and only Lynn Orman, who runs around town, runs around the country, checking out music, helping people out. We'll be right back. Lynn's got a few things she's going to share about what went on in the last year. Stay tuned here on the left end of your dial. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland, and I'm Michael James, still up here in the 49th Ward. And it brings me a lot of pleasure always to bring on our music producer, the one and only Lynn Orman Weiss. And somewhere in the greater Chicago area today, she is pulled over to talk to us for a little bit about things that went on in the past year. What stands out in the world, in Chicago, in the blues world, post-pandemic, whatever you got to share, Lynn, take it away.
Hey, Michael, thanks for having me on. And, I love listening to you because I always hear great music and great culture and great authors. And because of you, I ordered the Arhuli book. And
it's a great book.
Oh, my God. What a great picture book. It reminded me of what you do because it's really a narrative. It's like a photo documentary. It's absolutely stunning. Thank you for mentioning it.
Yeah, Lynn's talking about the book about Arhuli Records and their founder who just passed away. And it's his photographs, which are beautiful, although he only cared about getting a picture of whoever he was going to have on the record. And it was for the album cover. But it's a great book. I think it's called Down Home Music.
Yeah, it's really, really beautiful. And, as you know, that's been one of my passions over the last 7 years now, is making sure that I photograph artists on stage. And so that being said, I have been all over the place, kind of taking great photo. Not great because my camera broke. So I've been actually using my iPhone a lot.
Works.
And it's actually accommodated what I need for the magazines. I write for Big City Rhythm and Blues magazine and Buddy Guy magazine. And it's been good enough, actually.
Well, let me ask you, Lynn, what do you got in terms of what went on in the music world that is of note to our listeners and viewers, either in the world or in Chicago, Mississippi, wherever you're going to take us?
Well, as you know, this is kind of interesting, but Buddy Guy stopped his tour. He was on a world tour this summer, and it got delayed because of some minor back issues. But because of that, we in Chicago and people from all over the world that got to go to Buddy Guy Legends got to see Buddy because he was there every single night. And he's still there every single night in his little corner. And he would come up on the stage and talk about the bands. And let me tell you something, putting a little ducket in the bucket. Buddy did that for some of the young bands and some of the touring bands that came through. That's all he had to do is hold up a bucket, and people from all over the world would just be coming and dropping 20s in the bucket, and the artists would walk away with some really good bucks.
That's
And
good.
he will be starting his residency. People were afraid maybe he wasn't going to, but January 12th, he will open with our friend Bobby Rush, 90-year-old Bobby Rush. And Buddy just turned 87. And if I'm not sure if it's sold out yet or not, but it is a month residency, the whole month of January. I think it's only Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night this year. But always one of my favorite places to go and hear the blues.
Buddy
So,
guy.
buddy guys, legends. But I'm actually doing a story, Michael, on places that you would not expect to hear music, like little shops or coffee shops or the wine goddess in Evanston or Frolic and Detour. People are doing things that are very intimate. And, some people are still masked up because they're concerned about the comeback of COVID and RSV. But it's really pretty extraordinary to go to all these little places and see some kind of off the chain, very down home blues and jazz and folk music and indie music, including some of your friends.
Well, I like hearing that my friends are working.
They are.
Why don't you talk a little bit about places that people can go to hear music? We had a pandemic that hit the musicians in the world really hard.
Yeah, it did.
And people are playing out again. I mean, you took me up to Space in Evanston, and we had a really good time seeing Mo Better Brown. And then, because I fell asleep early, I didn't go to a couple other opportunities I had. But what are some of the places, Lynn, that you go to that are open now and have musicians kicking it out every night or pretty regularly?
Well, one of the things that I love about Chicago, and I'm just stretching my knowledge and my love for music in this city. I just discovered a couple of places, one on Montrose called Angelo's, and they have a really great band there called the Wind Gypsies. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go see them on New Year's Eve, no cover charge, open menu, really wonderful. You and Paige should come. It's going to be great. And then another place that's been around forever, owned by Sue Fuller, called Fuller's Pub, Irish Pub, on Irving Park Road. And they have music, including your friend John McDonald, who plays on Wednesday evenings. I know on the 29th of December, they're going to have Mary Lane. Dennis Melzer does a jam, sort of a folk indie rock blues jam. It Fuller's the first of every month. And I fell in love with this place. It's I think it's Old Irving Park or Albany Park, but I'm not used to going to, neighborhood bars. And some of these neighborhood bars have the best music and the best jams you ever want to hear.
Well, a big jump from a neighborhood bar to probably Soldiers Field. What about the Rolling Stones coming to town? And are you getting a ticket to that?
Very, very funny that you mentioned that. Okay, so I just came from John Primer's house where, he's nominated for a Grammy.
Last week's guest we had on.
Yes. Teardrops from Magic Slim live at Rose's Lounge, my favorite little juke joint in Chicagoland. Anyway, we talked about it and he's like, on his bucket list, be great to play an open Rolling Stones who will be at Soldier Field, They're like, John's a little bit younger than Mick and Keith, actually.
Is
So,
John going to
yes.
open? Is he going to open for the Stones?
Well, that's on his bucket list. And if anybody
Okay.
listening, because look on his shelf in his basement was a videotape of him playing when the Rolling Stones jumped on the stage at Checkerboard Lounge.
Yeah. I wish I was there. I wasn't.
Well, Bob Dylan was here this year, right? And he was at the Aragon maybe? And one of the things he did in every single town that he went to is he paid homage. He played one of his favorite artists from that city. And here in Chicago, I believe he did Nick Gravenitis. He did Born in Chicago, and tribute to him and to Sam Lay. So yeah, it's great. We need to go see the artists who are still living legends in this city. And I wanted to say one thing before we take off here. The Chicago Reader has the Chicago Reader poll, which next year, Live from the Heartland better get nominated for Best Radio Show. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I don't really know about us, but maybe they will now.
Well, we're going to have to tell them. And there's a number of radio stations, but some of the best young artists who are in this city, like when your son was playing, are nominated this year, including the Blues. I mean, there's a huge long list. And that poll is not only for Best Bar, I know Rose's Lounge is on that, Best Independent Record Label, Best Artist, Best Hip Hop and Jazz. And it's really interesting. And you can vote, anybody can vote until January 14th.
Lynn Orman, you did a great job. Keep us posted. Get ready for next week or the week after. I'll be in touch later. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland. I'm Michael James here in the 49th Ward, bringing you the Live from the Heartland show. And now it's always an honor and pleasure to bring my cousin, Adam James, on. He's a former football player at Northwestern. He is a very, very attentive guy when it comes to sports and all things sports. And he's going to talk to us about the year in review and what's been going on. Hello, Adam. How you doing today?
Hello, everybody at the Heartland. Great to see everybody. Great to see you, Michael.
Good to have you on. Earlier in the show, when we were talking politics over the last year, we with Thom Clark, he did mention the new stadium proposed at Northwestern. So let's start with Northwestern, whether it's football, their stadium, whatever you want to spill on us. Go for it.
Well, fantastic. Well, I really appreciate being on the year-end review show and the year-end review sports. I'd like to take a moment to remember earlier in the year, we, of course, had a segment where we talked about Northwestern's football program. And at that time, of course, they were dealing with a major scandal involving hazing. We talked about my experiences when I was a football player there, what hazing is and how that impacts a young student athlete, and how important it is to stamp that kind of thing out. So at that time, one of the things I encouraged people who love sports, love Chicago, love Northwestern to do is support that football team. Those young men are going to get out there and play, and they're going to put their heart and bodies on the line. So give them some support, cheer them on. I'm really happy to say that it's been an amazing season. For those of us who followed along, they fought, they played really hard and really smart and really well organized football. And they achieved some great success. Towards the end of the year, they got on a great winning streak, won the last 3 regular season games, including beating our rival, University of Illinois. And then we went to a bowl game and won that, the Las Vegas Bowl. So congratulations to Coach Braun and the Northwestern Wildcats. Great season. I'm wearing a shirt today for the Northwestern University Black Alumni Association. My teammate, Daryl Newell, who's a fantastic football player, great student athlete, and a great man. He is now the president of the Alumni Association, and I'm wishing him success and all of my fellow Wildcats.
Well, Adam, let's get a little bit of. We already talked earlier in the show about Dyke Stadium, so let's not go there. But how about you giving us a few minutes of the sports in 2003 in review?
Absolutely. Well, there were tremendous successes that happened throughout the sporting world. I'd like to take a moment to recognize Coco Gauff and our U.S. Open champion. United States women's tennis players are fantastic. Our tennis program here in the United States is doing very well. We've got a lot of young champions coming up. A good friend of mine, another Northwestern alumni, Katrina Adams, is the former USTA, United States Tennis Association champion, or president rather, a former tennis champion herself at Northwestern on the pro circuit. So I want to wish everybody in the tennis world the best. My dear friend, Ben Bronco, who is the tennis coach at Toluca Lake Tennis and Fitness Club, his two sons are champion players themselves. His oldest son is on the UC Santa Barbara team, the top 20 ranked. He's a blue chip player there. And his youngest son, Lorenzo Bronco, is the 18 and under national champion here in the United States. So congratulations to the Broncos.
Well, that's good. So that covers tennis.
Yes, sir.
What about the World Cup? Speaking of women.
Yes, Women's World Cup, huge accomplishment, great tournament. Unfortunately, ended on a really sour note, as we know. It's just an example of how women's sports are often plagued by cultural issues that sometimes come about in regards to how women are treated and respected in this world. So that's unfortunate that happened. But the good news is that it was addressed. It was firmly put in its place. And there were major changes that happened there with the Italian women's soccer program, football, there in Italy. And then, of course, another thing I wanted to take a moment to recognize is just how women's sports in general has grown over the years. There's a lot of political components that are being discussed. I'm a big believer in freedom. I believe that the government should stay out and let these sports organizations figure it out for themselves. And that's how I believe it should process. So I'm wishing everybody the best of luck out there in our women's sports programs.
Well, I got to say that I've been watching a lot of women's volleyball, mainly Big Ten.
Yes.
My granddaughter got into playing volleyball. She's in high school, pretty young still, a really good setter. And she really sparked my granddaughter, Olympia
Yes.
Baltimore James. And she really piqued my interest in volleyball in general, but women's volleyball in particular. And so I've been watching that.
Well, I grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii. And in Hawaii, the women's volleyball program, the Rainbow Wahinis, are phenomenal. And they've always been a great program. And it's a huge following in Hawaii. People tune in and watch the Rainbow Wahinis women's volleyball program. It's a fantastic sport, a lot of fun, a lot of action. Now, the other thing I was going to talk about as we wrap up the 2023 year in sports is the changing landscape in college sports and how, in particular with the Heartland, with Big Ten country, there's a big change. And that is that USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon are all going to join the Big Ten. What? So, it's funny because I was talking to my son about this. USC and UCLA, of course, are the rivals, Oregon and Washington as well, that we'd play in the Rose Bowl. And now they're part of the same conference. So it just goes to show things are changing. A lot of activities going on out there in the world of sports. And so I wanted to segue that into, going into this new year. And as we look at the new year, there's some amazing sporting events that are going to come up in 2024. In particular is the Paris Olympics. So for all of us that love all the other sports like track and field and swimming and diving and all those other great sports, this is our opportunity to tune in and watch some amazing athletes perform.
No, it's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it. And talking about women's sports, I did want to say that for the younger people who don't know about it, there was a decision called Title IX, which talked about equality. You can fill us in, Adam, but it really has changed the shape of sport on campuses in general and probably beyond.
Indeed, absolutely. And basically, in a nutshell, what it is, legally, we looked at the sporting world and we said there has to be equal opportunity. That obviously football, baseball, basketball are so popular. They drive a lot of these athletic programs. But the women athletes, they need their opportunity to get out there, compete, have fun, make a statement, represent their universities, their communities. So that's what Title IX was about, was giving equal representation, equal opportunity. One more thing I want to mention about 2024 is that you asked me to look at what's coming up in 2024. And I noticed something really unique, and that is the T20 World Cup. So what that is that? That is the Cricket World Championship. It's a major tournament. And what's happening is it's going to happen this year in the United States, along with the West Indies. But for those of people out there who love cricket, and I'm not one, I haven't watched the sport, but I know it's really, really popular. So I'm going to tune in. I want to watch it. I want to see why it's so popular in other areas of the world. So for those of you who live in Dallas, Florida, and New York, according to the website for the T20 tournament, you're going to have a chance to go out and watch some world-class cricket. So check it out.
Well, I remember when soccer was pretty new, when there wasn't very, in my high school, we had a team when I was playing football, and they went on to be the Connecticut State champions, et cetera. Soccer is everywhere now, everywhere in the world. And cricket is pretty popular too. So it's coming up. It's
just amazing how, the international lines are being crossed. Sports are covering all over the world. I did want to take one last moment to mention one other amazing thing that's happening here in Los Angeles that has this international connection. And that is this amazing baseball player from Japan, Shohei Ohtani. The Cubs just missed out on him. He was supposedly very close to.
I was hoping the Sox would get him. Go ahead.
But he signed with the Dodgers, and then the Dodgers turned around and signed Yamamoto, another amazing Japanese baseball player. My wife is Japanese American, and her grandfather, who had immigrated to the United States from Japan, living in Hawaii, would send baseball equipment back to his hometown. There's actually a statue of him in the small town in Japan because he helped bridge and build that passion for that sport. There's no wonder why he is such a popular baseball player and is so successful.
Well, Adam, we got about 1 minute left. What else you got? Anything else?
Absolutely. I got my final message. I'm so glad you gave me 1 more minute to deliver this last little message. As you've heard me on this show before, part of what I like to tell people to do when it comes to sport, encourage people to do when it comes to sports, is get out there, do it yourself. Get out there, train, have fun, work out, participate in a sports league. If you have certain physical limitations, there's still aspects of sporting that you can be involved with, coaching and encouraging and cheering on. So for all of you out there who love sports, love our communities, I encourage you to get out there and participate. Play a sport, encourage a sport, coach a sport, have fun. Happy New Year, everybody.
Thanks, Adam. James, cousin, you're always good to have on the show, and it's good to see you. We are going to now bring on someone who was a wonderful athlete himself, personal trainer, the one and only Dan McNeil. And those people here in the 49th Ward in Rogers Park know Dan well. He passed away at the beginning of the pandemic. It's one of the biggest losses besides family that I've ever had in my life. And I was looking through earlier editions of the Live from the Heartland show, and I found this one where he reads a poem. So the next 3.5 minutes of the show will be Dan McNeil from a few years back, giving us a poem that gives us some inspiration and kind of a pathway going forward. So we'll be right back after we listen to Dan McNeil, the late great.
Living in rhythm and rhythm and living. Living in rhythm and rhythm and living. Living in rhythm and rhythm and living. Rhythm, rhythm, rhythm. Rhythm is the soul and source of order, pulsating even in the heart of chaos. It is the natural refinement and higher octave of organization. Rhythm is a pattern with purpose. It is devotion in motion, an anchor in a sea of activity. It is not GE, but rhythm that brings good things to life. It is not a Coke, but rhythm that things go better with. Oh, yeah. Rhythm has graced my existence, measured my movements, and eased the steps of my struggle. And it is I who possess rhythm, even as it possesses me. It is in my walk and in my talk. Yeah. It is in my loving and living. It is in my blood and ancestry. Rhythm is a part of the history and mystery of me. So it is I, and thus it is us, rhythm's heirs to its treasures that must with a deeper knowing break this rhythm of violence. Thus it is us who must kill the killings, reverse the current EVIL to the flow of LIVE and let live. Silence this chorus of grief. Release the singing birds of harmony from the mouth of peace. Halt this crazy cadence. Halt this crazy cadence. Halt this crazy cadence of kids' death march on our youth. Kids hip-hopping to the cacophony of gunshots. dancing not to the light steps of a hope-filled future, but limping to the beat of the beat down, missing the very beat of their childhood while dancing the discord dance of the demise. Break this rhythm of violence, this rhythm of blood flowing over broken glass, crippled dreams and shattered possibilities, this rhythm of screaming blue lights and silver blades flashing through black nights, this rhythm of mothers' tears and jailhouse jeers, of crutches on stairs and the clanging of wheelchairs, this rhythm of coffins eased to earth and the shoveling of dirt, this rhythm of names not called, balls not bounced, friends not found, smiles not seen, laughs not heard, hugs not felt, time not spent, love not made. Break this rhythm of violence, and arise, ye mystic warriors, with your seeds of healing for this season of senseless killing. Out of order. Break this rhythm of violence.
Woo!
Let's hear it for Dan McNeil.
Oh, yeah. Okay, everybody. I'm Michael James, your host for Live from the Heartland show, and it's time to wrap it all up. I want to thank the people who make this show possible. That would be Cal James, our engineer, our producer, Thom Clark, also a guest this week, as well as Lynn Orman, our music producer, our sports reporter, Adam James, and want to thank the people who do the music coming in, would be Kevin Moe, and the music going out, which would be Chick Street Man. And I'll be back next week. I'm going to get to some interesting guests, and we'll have some good things to report and maybe some negative things to report, but we'll be going forward. And thank God that 2023 is over and we're moving into 2024. Maybe it'll be even better than the last year was. Let's hope so. We want to thank you for watching the Live from the Heartland show on CAN TV. New episodes air every Thursday, 9 p.m. Central Time in Sweet Home, Chicago on Channel 21 or streaming at cantv.org. These episodes debut a week earlier on Fridays at youtube.com/heartlandmedia, where you can also watch individual interviews. Audio episodes are broadcast a week earlier on WLUW each Saturday, 9 a.m. on the left end of your dial at 88.7 FM or streaming everywhere worldwide at WLUW.org. They're available on Apple and Spotify podcasts by looking up Live from the Heartland on either platform, and are also broadcast a week earlier on Lumpen Radio each Friday at 9 a.m. on 105.5 FM and streaming at lumpenradio.com. I'm Michael James, and I'm glad to have been your host. Until next time, remember, do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people. Over and out.